You know, when we think of the Deepwater Horizon disaster, we probably all have the same images seared into our minds. Fire, smoke, and that endless, dark slick of oil spreading across the ocean. But what if I told you the real catastrophe, the one that set everything in motion, wasn't a busted pipe or a failed valve? What if it started way earlier and a lot quieter with something as simple as bad data? That's the story we're getting into today.
And before we talk about anything else, we have to start with this number, 11. That's not a statistic. That's 11 people. 11 people who went to work one day and never, ever came home to their families. So before we get into the oil, the money, the data, this is where the story truly begins, with the incredible human cost.
And this is the day it happened. April 20th, 2010. The day the Deepwater Horizon rig out there in the Gulf of Mexico was rocked by a catastrophic explosion that would change everything. That one explosion kicked off a chain reaction that would eventually lead to this number. $65 billion. I mean, it's a number so big it's hard to even wrap your head around, right? But it gives you a sense of the sheer, unimaginable scale of this failure. Okay, so first, let's just quickly recap the disaster that we all saw unfold on our screens. The part of the story that's about the physical catastrophe, the one that became the largest marine oil spill in American history. The fallout was just immense. You had the 11 lives tragically lost, of course. Then, an unbelievable 210 million gallons of oil just gushed into the Gulf. That $65 billion figure, that covers the cleanup, the penalties, the whole shebang. It kicked off massive congressional investigations and basically forced the entire industry to completely rethink its safety rules. This wasn't just some accident. It was a shock to the entire system.
But you know, that's the part of the story most of us already know. Now we're going to peel back those layers. We're going to look for the quieter failure, the one that was happening long before the explosion, deep beneath the surface. And this one wasn't a failure of machines. It was a failure of information.
This quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? Long before the blow-up preventer physically failed, the data had already failed. The whole disaster was basically born from flawed information, from models that were painting a dangerously rosy picture of what was really going on down there. And this table, wow, this shows you exactly what I'm talking about, the huge gap between what they thought was happening and what was actually happening. Look here, BP's model assumed the well pressure would be manageable. The reality? It was dangerously, catastrophically high. And why was the model so wrong? Well, because they were working with incomplete data. There were critical gaps, and that led them to a risk analysis that was way too optimistic, when in fact the real risk was just completely unacceptable. And this all has a name. It's called a data integrity failure. It's what happens when the very information you're counting on to make life or death decisions is just wrong or inconsistent or totally unreliable. It's not a mechanical problem, you see? It's an information problem. And get this. Here's the root of that information problem. You'd think for a multi-billion-dollar, ultra-high-stakes operation, they'd be using some incredible cutting-edge tech, right? Nope. They were using spreadsheets and siloed databases. I mean, these are tools that just weren't tough enough for the job. They didn't talk to each other, and they made it way too easy for people to misread what was really going on.
And this is where the story really widens out. Because believe it or not, this wasn't some freak one-off event. The Deepwater Horizon disaster fits into a really familiar and kind of disturbing pattern of major system failures throughout history. Just take a look. It doesn't matter if it's the BP oil spill, a massive FAA outage that grounds every single plane in the country, or a national health system losing catastrophic amounts of patient data. When you dig down deep enough, the root cause is so often the same. It all comes back to a data integrity failure. Different situations, different industries, but the exact same core problem.
Okay, so if we know this keeps happening over and over again, what are we supposed to learn from it? How do we actually learn from the wreckage of these disasters and break the cycle?
So here are the big takeaways, the things we have to get right. First, any model that deals with safety-critical stuff has to be constantly checked against live, real-world data. Second, we have to get it through our heads that a spreadsheet is just not a substitute for a real, resilient database. Third, risk modeling can't be some secret black box. It needs to be transparent. It needs other people to look at it. And this one is so important. When you find a gap in your data, that's not an excuse to just make an optimistic guess. That's a red flashing alarm bell. Every single decision has to be based on information you know is real and verified. And really, it all comes down to this. We live in a world where pretty much every major decision is driven by data. If that's the case, then the integrity of that data can't be an optional extra. It has to be absolute. The stakes are just way too high. And that brings us to a really chilling thought. If we don't learn these lessons, history is absolutely guaranteed to repeat itself. So the question is, where is the next cautionary tale going to pop up?
Well, tragically, we didn't have to wait very long to find out. The exact same pattern, this idea of data failure and misplaced trust in the wrong tools, it showed up again with the Titan submersible implosion. It's a devastating and eerie echo of Deepwater Horizon. Reports suggested that some critical systems, maybe even navigation, were relying on off-the-shelf tools that just weren't built for that kind of environment. And once again, when placed under literal, extreme pressure, the trust in the system and its data, it completely collapsed.
And this leaves us with one last, really sobering question to think about. When you're miles under the sea, or miles deep in the Earth's crust, you can't see what's going on. You can't touch it. You can't hear it. Data is the only thing you have that connects you to reality. So what happens when that data breaks? What happens when you can no longer trust it? That right there is the ultimate lesson of Deepwater Horizon. A story not just about oil and engineering, but about a data failure that cost a fortune and 11 precious lives.